Welcome to another episode of Sounds Reasonable. I am your host, Dr. Brad, and I am joined at the production of our weekly show by Tim, Tracy, and Abby, and hopefully Tracy will be joining us soon. We are all members of the Free Thought community, and our Sounds Reasonable website can be found on Facebook. Do you experience frequent irrational thoughts, a pervasive belief in a divine skydance, an insatiable urge to read horoscopes, perform spells, speak in tongues, or pray? Fortunately, you are now listening to the cure for these ailments. Sounds Reasonable. This show is dedicated to bringing you, the listener, the latest news in free thought, science, logic and reason, and politics and religion. And of course, we encourage you to share your thoughts with us after every episode, excuse me, by posting comments and asking questions on our Facebook page. What is free thought? What does it mean to be a free thinker? The dictionary definition is a person who forms opinions about religion based on reason, independent of tradition, authority, or established belief. Here's Christopher Hitchens' working definition. Our belief is not a belief. Our principles are not a faith. We do not rely solely upon science and reason because these are necessary rather than sufficient factors. But we distrust anything that contradicts science or outrages reason. We may differ on many things, but what we respect is free inquiry, open-mindedness, and the pursuit of ideas for their own sake. We'll now move on to our science news segment, and remember that the scientific mind is one that allows its perceptions of reality to be constrained by good evidence and good argument. Now, we have spent a lot of time discussing various science news stories on Sounds Reasonable. However, we have not yet taken the time to describe what science is. So today, I'm going to do just that. So, Tim, if I could have the first slide, please. Okay, so let's start out with a relatively standard definition of just what is science. So we can define science as the intellectual and practical activity encompassing the systematic study of the structure and behavior of the physical and natural world through observation and experiment. So note that those are the two routes that we have to get at answering a particular scientific question, either observation and or experiment. Okay, next slide, please, Tim. Okay, so what does it mean to be a scientist? Now, you'll note that the one definition given by Sam Harris is that the scientific mind is one that is willing to have its concepts of reality constrained by good evidence and good argument. And we use that in our opening remarks every week. So hopefully by now our listening audience is familiar with that. But another rather poignant definition was given by the philosopher A.C. Grayling. Science is the outcome of being prepared to live without certainty, and therefore a mark of maturity. It embraces doubt and loose ends and reflects knowledge of a process that is not perfect, but is the best we have. Now, I've argued many times with various individuals about this aspect of science. It does indeed make one live without certainty, which is why a lot of people have trouble fully accepting science, because they don't like that. Let's just be honest. They do not like having to live without certainty. That's why religion, to be quite frank, is still popular, is because it's supposedly giving a person certainty, right? And yet nothing could be further from the truth. And then another counter argument I'll oftentimes get is, well, you scientists can never seem to get it right. You'll say something this week and then next week it changes. Well, we fully admit, and this is something I wish people would really pay attention to. We fully admit that our method and our processes are not perfect, but it truly is the best route we have to getting at the actual truth of any particular problem.
And Brad,
okay. Go ahead, Tim.
Well, I was just going to mention too that convincing people that there's no absolutes. There's no absolutes in science, and that's right. The beauty of science is the fact that if new information comes along and says, well, that's not quite right, that we can then adapt and change to what the new evidence or the data is saying. And again, that's the beauty of science.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely right. Next slide, please, Tim.
Oops.
Okay, so this brings us to the scientific method. So the scientific method is a way to ask and answer scientific questions by making observations and doing experiments. That is, science is what scientists do. Okay, the steps of the scientific method are to ask a question, or I've other times seen it described as define the problem. Then you do your background research. So what have other scientists previously discovered concerning the particular question that's being asked? Then construct a hypothesis. Now, why do we do the background research before we construct a hypothesis? And the reason for that, and I'll let you guys jump in if you have additional reasons, of course. So, but the major reason for that is no scientific idea stands alone. You need a previous hypothesis to construct the next one. And so it's a continuum, if you will, of knowledge. Okay, we don't start except I suppose we'd have to go all the way back to cavemen, perhaps, where the beginning of knowledge started. Okay, understanding how to define a problem and try to determine a solution. But certainly in the modern era of science, no particular scientific idea stands alone. Okay, it requires an understanding of previous ideas, and then you subsequently build hypotheses based off of those. So, anything to add, guys?
I would also say that, going off of what you said before, sometimes science has a wrong conclusion. Sometimes we look at the data and we have the wrong conclusion. And so going back and looking at what other people found is important, and knowing what is known is that, and maybe even repeating that same experiment or those same observations to see if the correct conclusion was made in the first place.
Yes. Right. Yeah, that's right.
And again, you're looking back to see, oh, well, has someone else also made those same observations and come up with these same, potential hypotheses, and what's been done on it before? One thing that popped in my mind was the rediscovery of Mendel's work, without those.
Yeah, that's a good
without
one.
them going back and looking at, what has been published. Has anybody looked at this before? That his work would have never been rediscovered. And so it's important to look at what happened before, what has gone on in the past.
So then, once we have constructed our hypothesis, we set out to investigate whether or not that hypothesis will stand up. And this is another aspect that I want to point to, is that we don't prove a hypothesis. Okay, we simply support it. Okay, we provide data that will support a hypothesis. And quite frankly, you want to try to construct your hypothesis so that it can be shown to be incorrect. Okay, that's the actual route by which you need to proceed in the purest sense of scientific research.
And I'd like to add something there, because I think that's a point where a lot of people that are not in the science, in science fields, tend to think, oh, well, if you're saying you can't prove it, then you're wrong. And I think that just is a issue with how people think about science. We don't prove things, and that's not a flaw. That's a good thing. That means that we're willing to accept new evidence when it comes about. So I think the idea of not being able to prove something is a benefit to science, but a lot of people see that as something negative, like, oh, well, you don't have any proof, or you didn't prove it. It's like, no, but we accepted it with a lot of evidence.
Yep, there's a really good TED talk that and it's titled this. Well, it's titled "The Scientific Method is Crap," but what he talks about, but the scientific process. But one of the things he says is that if you were to try to gather information to prove something, you would have to test every hypothesis. But really, all you have to do is just find the one that says you're not quite right.
Yes.
And once you found the one that says you're not quite right, then you modify, redesign, come up with your new hypothesis. So you don't have to test every hypothesis. You just have to test to find the one that says you're not quite right.
Yeah, that's correct. Then once you've gathered data, you analyze your data and draw a conclusion. And this is where statistics plays a major role. So I oftentimes went through this with students also. So how certain should we be before we draw a conclusion? And you don't know unless you use statistics. You don't know how certain you are. And so any particular scientific experiment in biology anyway, usually the best that you can get to is 95% certainty. Okay, so you have a 95% probability of being correct. And there are a lot of times in biology where it'll be 90%. Now, other branches of science are more precise. For example, the certainty that quantum theory is correct is drawn out to the equivalent of being wrong from the measurement of the length of the United States coast to coast by the width of a single human hair. That's how precise measurements can be in the scientific world. So that to me, that's a mind-boggling stat. I'm not sure how many zeros are in front or are behind, I should say, that decimal point. But anyway, Tracy's blinging us.
Oh, yeah, she's been sick this week. She's still not feeling well. So
okay, all right.
I told her we'd carry on for her. So
sure, okay. So anyway, that to me is a pretty mind-blowing stat when you think about being able to measure from coast to coast the length of the United States, and the degree of error would only be the width of a single human hair. That's how accurately those measurements can be made in the world of physics.
It's amazing.
And then finally, communicate your results. You know, that I taught a whole class. In fact, I think both Tim and Abby had that class from me, scientific communication. Taught a whole course on the value of doing that and make sure that you do it very well. Now, it is important for your experiment to be a fair test. Now, what do we mean by a fair test? Well, this occurs when you change only one factor or variable and keep all the other conditions the same. Now, of course, the control, okay, will be where you don't change a factor. Okay, and that's what you're comparing it to. So your control would be all the other conditions except the one that you change for the experiment. Now, while scientists study how nature works, it's engineers that create new things such as products, websites, environments, and experiences. And that's something else that people oftentimes get confused, is the difference between science and technology. So science is how nature works. Technology is applying how those things work.
Right. You're right. It's always trying to get them to understand there's a difference between the pure science and applied science. You know, where the applied sciences takes what's learned by the pure science and puts it into some application, like you said.
Right.
I think, you know, this is an issue that we see, or at least I see in science and public education at the middle school and high school level, is that there isn't a distinction between pure science and applied science, and people tend to think that they're the same thing, that if you can do one thing, you can do another. And then they also tend to think, well, if you're not making anything, if it's not applied, then what's the point? Which obviously we have a lot of benefit of that basic research to do the applied. I mean, that's, you know, you have to have that background knowledge and have that understanding of how things work before you can take it any further. So obviously there's a lot of benefit, but I don't think people see that kind of in the background science, that basic research science. So that, I mean, I think we need to stress the importance of that. And I think, and we'll talk about this later, but the new administration has put more emphasis on understanding why that basic research and funding that basic research. But in science, I've also seen at the education or middle school, high school education level that administration also doesn't understand the difference. And they think every science is just science. So like I have, you know, my department, we all have kind of our specialties, and the administration tends to think that, you know, if someone leaves, then the physics teacher can just teach biology, or, you know,
Right.
if the biology, yeah, I mean, or if the physics person leaves, then the biologist can just teach physics. And it's like, you know, sometimes we can have some overlapping, but that's not really how it works. We all have our special emphasis in science. And of course, we could understand those other branches, but I mean, to be able to teach science, you really have to have a really in-depth understanding of that particular science, and it's just not possible to know everything.
Yes.
Yeah. So a good example of basic research leading to you know, applied science is what we're experiencing right now. If we had not had the experiments leading up to our understanding of RNA the way we do, we would not have the current COVID vaccines. So that, you know, if you're looking for a contemporary example, that would be a good one. Okay, next slide, please, Tim. Okay, so science is based upon three premises. The world universe is real, and the human mind is capable of knowing its real nature. I've said this many times, but if you don't accept this one, why pursue anything? Because if you don't accept this as being true, then you just need to learn to imagine better and be on that beach full time. Now, stated another way, and I've always liked this quote by Albert Einstein, the most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it's comprehensible. Okay, next slide, please, Tim. And so this brings us to a couple concepts. So if the world is real and the human mind is capable of knowing its real nature, we are not in the matrix. Okay, we are not part of a simulation, nor are we part of a giant's dream, which many bar conversations have oftentimes devolved to. Okay, next slide, please, Tim. Secondly, all observable phenomena are the effects of a physical or chemical cause that is measurable. In the words of Lord Kelvin, tell it to me in numbers. So, of course, that's why we oftentimes will say mathematics is the language of science. Okay, tell it to me in numbers. And then there's a corollary to this premise, and that is that any explanation of complex observations should invoke a simplicity of causes such that the simplest explanation with the least modifying statements is considered the best. And we refer to this concept as Occam's razor. Okay, next, please. So therefore, there is no evidence for miracles. Again, everything we observe, are capable of observing, are capable of measuring, is the result of physical or chemical cause. And so I've always liked this little cartoon. I used to have it posted in the lab. Maybe you guys might remember that. But I think you should be more specific here in step 2. And of course, he's pointing to then a miracle occurs. So that's out of bounds, folks, if you want to consider your work as being scientific. Okay, next slide, please, Tim. So finally, nature is unified. So when experimental conditions are replicated, identical results will be obtained regardless of when or where the work is repeated. So the example I oftentimes use here is at what temperature would water boil on the moon? Because it's not going to boil at 100 degrees, right, like it does on the Earth. So what temperature would it boil at on the moon? Well, fortunately, okay, we can determine that by using the gas law, right?
Right.
Okay, so we could determine what temperature that water will boil on the moon. So it doesn't mean that anything has changed. We just simply have to apply the gas law. And so therefore, water does indeed boil at 100 degrees, but it does so because it also is subject to the gas law here on Earth. Okay, just like it would be on the moon or Pluto or Mars or wherever. Then secondly, the future will resemble the past so that what we learned yesterday applies tomorrow and vice versa. Now, this is a point that I got into a big argument with somebody at a meeting one time, actually, because I was presenting this to a free thought group. And what the gentleman that I was arguing with didn't understand was that scientific data has a tentative nature. So and the example he gave me was, well, we used to think that the universe was not expanding at an accelerated rate, but now we do. So isn't that an example of not the past not resembling what we know today? And I said, no. What you're confusing that with is something that we hadn't observed prior. Okay, so if you haven't observed it, okay, it's not going to influence that particular statement. Okay, so you have to have the observation. If you have an observation that changes something, guess what? That's the tentative nature of scientific data. Okay, new observations are allowed in science. Okay, next slide, please, Tim. So based on the a priori premises on which science is based, the rules of science are, first, it is guided by natural law. It must be explanatory by reference to natural law. It is testable against the empirical world. Where else would you be able to test it? Its conclusions are tentative, which we just described. And the last one, which a lot of people don't understand what this term means, so we'll expand on this a little bit. It is falsifiable. That does not mean that it can be faked. That is not what we're describing here. Of course, some people have tried to do that, but it's interesting that when that's happened, it's usually been other scientists that have uncovered the fraud. It hasn't been from somewhere else, because other scientists will try to replicate a lot of work that is being done out there, especially when it's cutting edge nature. And if they can't, that's when it gets investigated. So what do we mean by it is falsifiable? Okay, so by falsifiable, we simply mean that it can be shown to be incorrect. It can be shown to be false. Okay, so when that happens, what do? We discard that hypothesis and move on to the next one. Okay, so that's what we mean by falsifiable. Now, consider a number of religious claims, for example. They are typically framed such that they cannot be falsified. Okay, and that is a huge difference between the way science is done and some other claims to, shall we say, truth. Okay, was that my last slide, Tim? Oh, no, okay, good. One more. I think this is the last one. Okay, so the distinguishing principles of science from other human endeavors. So naturalism, this is a system of thought that rejects all spiritual and supernatural explanations of the world and holds that science is the sole basis of what can be known. And I stand by that statement. I have never seen anything that contradicts that statement. Empiricism, application of observation and experiment in determining something. The perception that all knowledge is derived from the experience of the senses. How else would you get it? Where else are you going to get it? And then theory or theorizing. Okay, a theory is a well-established explanation for scientific data. Theories typically cannot be proven, but they can become established if they are tested by several different scientific investigators. A theory can be disproven by a single contrary result. Okay, and again, that's what we would mean by falsification, falsifiable. Okay, being able to disprove something that was previously established. Okay, was that the last one? Oh,
almost.
Hey, Brad, I just want to, just because a lot of our people that are watching might not be in the science realm, that's another thing that we hear a lot as educators is like, oh, well, it's only a theory, because people throw that word around. And in science like that, I try to really drive it into my students. Like a theory is a big deal. Like that means that we have a ton of evidence. There's nothing that goes against it as, you know, as of right now, but it's not, you're right. It's not proven because there might be more evidence that we haven't seen yet. And we have to be willing to look at that evidence if it comes about. So the word theory is a really, really big deal in science. And it's not just something we throw around. Like, you know, normally people talk about, oh, I have a theory about that. No, that's a hypothesis. Let's
Right.
get that correct.
Exactly. And I did this exercise when I gave that Darwin Day lecture. Tim probably remembers that, but I gave a list of 4 terms: fact, law, theory, hypothesis, and I asked the audience to place them in order of most important to least important. And amazingly, except for Tim, no one in the audience got that. Yes, it's going to go theory, law, hypothesis, fact. Now think about how the typical layperson would do that. You know, they would probably go fact, law, theory, hypothesis. Okay, it's typically how the layperson would put them up there.
Yeah.
And so then I gave the example of how theory, or why theory is at the top. It's because theories have the greatest degree of explanatory power. So I use the example again of water. You know, I just said, well, let's take one fact. You know, water boils at 100 degrees centigrade. But does that tell us why water boils at 100 degrees centigrade? No, just states the fact that it boils at 100 degrees. We need the theory of thermodynamics to understand why water boils at 100 degrees. And so that's, you know, that was the example I used that day.
Yeah, and it's good because you can throw in, well, water boils at 100 degrees Celsius and then ethanol boils at 80. Okay, why don't they boil the same? You know, why?
Right, exactly. Yeah, that'd be a great addition to it. Yeah, great addition. So a practical distinction was between science and quote unquote other methods of knowing was illustrated in the debate between Bill Nye and Ken Ham. Now, Tim or Abby, did you see that debate or have you watched it?
I've seen parts of it, but it's been a while since I've.
And it's tough to stomach the whole thing.
Yeah. I remember when it was on I think it was on TV when they first did it. And I was like, yeah, I'm gonna watch this. This is, you know, this is gonna be really interesting. And I think I watched maybe 15 minutes of it or something. And I was like, oh no, I can't do this. Because I mean, it is just Bill Nye's like, you know, giving such reasonable explanations, and then Ken Ham, like you can't argue with someone who is, you know, faith-based in religion, because they have no evidence. There's nothing to argue against, because their faith is not based on any observations, empirical evidence. It's just what they say. And so the argument is so difficult to watch. I couldn't do it.
Why?
So go ahead, Tim.
Well, I say I use in my evolution talk, and one of the first things we define, you know, define evolution versus fact, and I just use a theological definition, which is the belief without faith, or belief without evidence. Faith is belief without evidence.
Right.
So
yeah, exactly.
How you argue that anything based on that?
Yeah. So in essence, at the end of the debate, the audience was allowed to submit questions. And so the one that stuck out in my mind was this one. So what, if anything, would ever change your mind? And without reading through all of Ken Ham's babbling here, the bottom line is, no one is ever going to convince me that the word of God is not true. And then we contrast that with what Bill Nye says. We would need just one piece of evidence. Bring on any of those things and you would change me immediately. So note the difference in the mindset, our listening audience. Okay, so the difference in the mindset, the inflexibility, not admitting that there's any possibility at all that I or my followers are wrong. Okay, so that to me says it all. And when you want to contrast quote unquote other ways of knowing to science. All right, well, I'm probably well over time my my allotted time here, but I think it was well spent. So let's go ahead and take our first break, and we'll be right back with more Sounds Reasonable.
All alive. The devil's in the detail, lingered inside. Oh, a holy crime. But how can I hide you without an alibi? It's a robber's fight without an alibi. You took my innocence. I can't wait no longer. I'm playing with the monsters. Everything that brought me alive. Going wrong like nonsense. Playing with the monsters. They brought me alive, but got no alibi. It's a robber's fight without an alibi. You took my innocence without an alibi. Devil's in the deep.
And we're back with more Sounds Reasonable on May 2nd, 2021. Now, one of the major reasons that I personally voted for Joe Biden was Trump's constant assault on science and scientists. Biden has quickly reversed this with his policies, and the results are already obvious with his success against COVID. Oops, I just noticed Abby isn't there.
Yeah.
Abby, come back.
Where are you?
There she is. She's back.
I'm here. I just forgot to turn my video on.
Oh, okay. All right.
Sorry, I'm here.
Okay, so Abby has further information to share on this subject. So Abby, tell us what has changed with the Biden administration's approach to science and science issues.
Oh, well, first of all, I would just like to say I am extremely impressed with just the idea that the administration lets scientists and experts speak about science, especially with the coronavirus. He does, what he is supposed to do, which is kind of take the back seat and say, I'm not an expert here. Let's let the experts talk. Let's let Fauci talk. Let's let the people from the NIH talk. And I really appreciate that, because I think that was a huge flaw in the previous administration, which, Trump just said all this random crap and didn't let the experts speak. And then it really, really confused the public. And then it also, I think, gave some power almost for normal people to try to talk about science in a way that they don't understand, but just, say things because they heard it from someone else that is also not an expert. So that alone, I think, has been a huge improvement. But the story that I will relay to you is from Scientific American, and this is from April 27, 2021. It's by quite a few authors, so I won't list all of them, but and this is, Biden has reversed Trump's war on science in his first 100 days. And some of you might know that he had a goal of vaccination in the first 100 days and completely surpassed that. And now is, had increased his goal. The administration, I should say, it's not, just Biden, but had increased the goal for vaccinations, and we're well on our way. And now we're to the point where we're trying to help other countries become vaccinated. A lot of stories have been out about India right now and the horrible situation that they're in. And then there was some backlash at first, like why isn't the United States helping India? And then, within a couple of weeks, we were on it. We were trying to say, okay, how can we get them vaccines? What can we do to help them? So lots of benefits in my eyes. But anyway, the story goes, hours after he won the 2020 presidential race, Joe Biden delivered a victory speech to a crowd of masked supporters in Delaware. What is the will of the people? He asked. To marshal the forces of science and the forces of hope in the great battles of our time. Today, as we near Biden's 100th day of office, the Union of Concerned Scientists reflects on his administration's progress towards marshaling the forces of science. This was and is no easy task, not least because of the previous administration's assaults on federal science. During the Trump administration, UCS documented nearly 200 instances of political interference in science-based decisions. And as new investigations become public, this number keeps growing. These attacks have real consequences, none so clear as the 565,000 lives lost in the US to the COVID-19 pandemic, a crisis fueled by the Trump administration's abandonment of science. But on the edge of 100 days, the Biden administration has already made great strides in building back and strengthening science even before inauguration. President Biden took the unprecedented step of elevating his science advisor to the cabinet level, a move we've supported for more than a decade, and a sign that he intends not only to listen to scientists, but to let them lead. And on January 27th, the president issued a memorandum on scientific integrity, making clear that his administration would not tolerate political manipulation of scientific evidence. The memo also directed science agencies to strengthen evidence-based decision-making and appoint chief science officers and scientific integrity officers, experts who oversee and enforce scientific integrity policies and practices. So kind of reiterating what I said at the very beginning is, just letting science do science and be the ones, making those decisions is alone just a huge improvement. This little bit is about the progress in COVID-19, climate change, which were two areas where President Biden and his administration has really focused. Obviously the pandemic was something that we're in need desperately of science and innovation in science to make sure that we have vaccinations going out and we get the pandemic under control with real information. But then also climate change, and this is really important, something that I would like to just praise the administration on, is not only just looking at climate change as yes, we're accepting, humans are involved in the climate changing, but also they're taking a special step into looking at how pollution is affecting minorities and people of different ethnicities or races, etc., and communities of poverty, which is just absolutely amazing that they're taking that extra step and saying, you know what, people of color are affected more by pollution and issues with climate change than white people, because they tend to live in areas where it's not it's not as restricted, I guess, as far as environmental pollution goes. So anyways, that was kind of a tangent, but Biden has centered science in his administration's fight against COVID-19. After he won the election, he formed a team of scientific experts to guide his administration's strategy to end the pandemic. The administration also formed a COVID-19 health equity task force to address the disparities in infections, deaths, and vaccine access. When the administration easily reached the goal of 100 million vaccines in people's arms in 100 days, it reached a new goal, 200 million vaccines in 100 days. Climate scientists and their work are welcome in the White House once again. On Inauguration Day, President Biden committed to rejoining the Paris Climate Agreement, created a national climate advisor position in the White House, revoked the Keystone XL pipelines federal permit as a Nebraskan, I'll talk to that, and raised the social cost of carbon. Secretary of the Interior Deb Haaland soon revoked Trump-era orders that promoted fossil fuel development on public lands and waters, and Biden paused oil and gas leasing on public lands. The administration has also promised to place aggressive limits on methane pollution, reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the transportation sector, and require public companies to disclose climate risks. This work is already underway. And I'd just like to comment on that we talked about this, I think, last week, the fact that the reason coal and fossil fuels in general seem cheaper than our other green options is because they're so heavily subsidized. And so, I mean, if we took those subsidies away and put that money into more environmentally friendly solutions, I mean, I think we would see the cost be worth it in the end. So that's my little spiel on that. But back to the article, the Biden administration has also prioritized environmental justice. So this is something I was talking about earlier. This is a much needed shift. Underserved communities tend to bear the brunt of the harms caused by anti-science policies like those of the Trump administration. The Biden administration's American Jobs Plan and EPA budget direct billions of dollars toward environmental justice work in communities. The White House also formed 2 working groups on environmental justice, which will advise the administration on how best to protect the health and safety of underserved communities, and created a leadership position on environmental justice within the Council on Environmental Quality. These efforts to restore federal science are encouraging. However, much remains to be done, and the Biden administration should seek advice from scientists, civil servants, government watchdogs, and other organizations on how to strengthen evidence-based decision-making and include a wider array of voices in the process. The administration must also learn from the past to protect federal science in the future. And I would just say there that I was listening to NPR the other morning, and they said they are looking at introducing more people of color and women into federal science or areas of research, because so far most of the people that work in science at the federal level are white and are male. And so just even having a shift and have some diversity there, I think will make a big difference in where money is allocated, and it will help with that like environmental justice approach that they're taking. The work that lies ahead, many administrations have stumbled on the path toward scientific integrity. The Obama administration listened to politics over science in some cases and dragged its feet on establishing scientific integrity policies across the federal government. The implementation of these policies proved even more difficult under Trump. Senior level political appointees often perpetuated the most egregious violations. Can't talk now. Today, one of the Biden administration's new task forces has been asked to review scientific integrity policies. as it crafts recommendations, the task force should heed lessons from the Obama and Trump administrations and seek input from outside the agencies. And I'll probably stop there. The article does go on and talk a little bit more about just reiterating, we need science in the decision-making. We need the scientific community, not only at the federal level, but at, independent organizations. Yeah, to be a part of these conversations. So,
Yeah, the other thing that I was a little surprised the article didn't mention was the rather dramatic increase in funding to our federal agencies for scientific research. So in the NIH budget, NSF budget, all rather dramatically increased. I called for a doubling, but it's more than that. I was thinking it was about on the order of 10 times, but anyway, I need to look that stat up so I know the exact increase. But it's more than double, I can tell you that, and that was definitely needed because it basically had not. In fact, it had been on a decrease since the scientific explosion in the 60s. And from that point on, we kept getting budget cut after budget cut to the federal science agencies. So that was great to see as well.
I did read the other day that they used to allocate 2% of the GDP towards R&D at the federal level. And then that has been cut to like maybe, I think they said less than 1% over the years.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me. Yeah.
And that's at least what I read, the new administration, Biden's administration's goal was to at least increase it back to the 2% GDP for during his administration. So I mean, I think you're right. I think it's more than double from what it was, but I don't know the exact numbers.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure, Brad, that we talked about this back in 90, 91, 92 or whatever, but the other concern was that the loss of funding or the difficulty to get funding just to advance science knowledge. I mean, if you couldn't justify it to some benefit to humans or whatever, then it was extremely hard to get any funding. So you had to be very creative when you wrote your grants. But yeah, that's a big I've always thought that was a big concern.
Well, yeah,
science. Right.
Whenever somebody makes that point, I immediately think of Sarah Palin and her comment on fruit flies. You remember that? She could not see the benefit of anyone studying fruit flies. How could there possibly be any benefit from that? And I think well, I won't go there. So
I think you're absolutely right. And we had this conversation, less than an hour ago that people don't understand the benefit of basic research in science.
Right.
And the whole idea is we don't know what we don't know. And so if we spend time and effort with that basic research, it really opens us up to a whole new world of possibilities because we actually understand how nature works. And so without that baseline knowledge, we're just throwing darts into the air, we don't know.
There's just countless examples of the serendipitous discoveries that came out of just doing, whatever your basic research was, where they discovered something that was sort of connected or maybe not even connected to what their research was involved in. So
yeah, absolutely. So all right, Abby, thanks so very much for that story.
Yeah, it was a good one. I love Scientific American. I'll promote those.
Yeah, absolutely. And for our audience, if you want a scientific journal that is written more for the lay person, Scientific American is a good one.
Yeah, very, very easy read. I think they're very good.
Yeah, they really are.
I use them often for students because I think that it's written at a level that can relay a lot of really good information to people in a good way. So
yeah, absolutely.
Great.
All right, so we will be right back with more Sounds Reasonable after this break.
So,
Messing with my head again. You had your heart set on me, but these feels, they come and go, and they come so easily. Tell me what it is about you that I can't forget, but you're breaking down my walls again just to set me free. Why do I, baby, why do I love the way you always leave me? Why do I, baby, why do I love the touch but never love the feeling? Why do I, baby, why do I love the way you always leave me? Why do I, baby, why do I love the touch but never love the feeling?
And we're back with our politics segment. President Biden gave a speech to a joint session of Congress this past week. So we're going to review some of the highlights of that speech and discuss the Republican rebuttal. So Tim has these two stories. So Tim, it's all yours.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Brad. Yes, I'm going to give a couple stories here. The first article comes to us from the Huffington Post, written by Sanja Karaneth, and is titled, "Here are the key moments from Biden's speech to Congress." I'm sure everyone well knows by now, the president spoke about what he's accomplished in the first 100 days in office and what he hopes Congress will help him achieve in the future. President Biden gave his first speech to a joint session of Congress on Wednesday, highlighting the accomplishments of his first 100 days and his proposals for accomplishing future goals. The president's first 100 days in office have been marked by crises that have come from all angles, from the coronavirus pandemic to climate change to racial injustice to recovering the economy. Biden spoke to lawmakers about how he's managed the crisis so far and what he wants Congress to help him achieve. Quote, "I can also report to the nation, America is on the move again," Biden said, "turning peril into possibility, crisis into opportunity, setbacks into strength," he was quoted saying. So here are some of the key moments from Biden's address. So first one is on Harris and Pelosi make history. Wednesday marked the first time two women, the vice president and the Speaker of the House, have shared the stage behind the president during a speech to a joint session of Congress. Nancy Pelosi, Democrat, California, has already made history as the first woman sworn in as House Speaker in 2007. During Biden's presidency, Harris became the first woman, a Black American and Indian American, to become vice president. Quote, "Madam Speaker, Madam Vice President," Biden said, gesturing to the two women. "No president has ever said those words from this podium, and it's about time." During the president's address to Congress, it is customary for the vice president and the House Speaker to sit behind him. Though Pelosi had previously taken that seat as Speaker, now that Kamala Harris is vice president, it created the first time a president had been joined on the House dais by two women. Next, proposing to fund education by raising taxes on the rich. Biden formally introduced his American Families Plan, which includes a proposal to spend $1.8 trillion over the next decade on the nation's education system. According to the president, The plan addresses 4 major challenges facing American families: access to a good education, access to affordable childcare, paid family and medical leave, and tax credits for the middle class. The proposal has an uncertain political path ahead as Biden proposes a number of tax hikes for some of the wealthiest Americans as a way of paying for the plan. Quote, "We're going to reform corporate taxes so they pay their fair share and help pay for public investments their businesses will benefit from. And we're going to reward work, not wealth," he said, adding that those making $400,000 or more will see their tax rate go back up to the 39.6%. Next, calling for drug pricing legislation. Biden asked Congress to pass legislation this year that would give the federal government the power to negotiate prescription drug prices. Well, we all know how outrageously expensive they are, he said, prescription drugs. In fact, we pay the highest prescription drug prices in the world right here in America, nearly 3 times as much as other countries. We can change that, he was quoted as saying. During his speech, the president talked about giving Medicare the power to save hundreds of billions of dollars by negotiating to lower drug costs, with the money saved going to strengthen the Affordable Care Act without costing taxpayers more. Another point, opening food benefits to people convicted of felonies. Part of Biden's America Families Plan included a provision that's slightly improved access for those who've been convicted of drug felonies to access the federal government's existing safety net. One of the defining images of this crisis has been cars lined up for miles waiting for a box of food to be put in the trunk. Did you ever think you'd see that in America, he said. That's why the American Rescue Plan is delivering food and nutrition assistance to millions of Americans facing hunger, and hunger is down sharply already. The 1996 welfare reform law prohibited people with felony drug convictions from receiving federal welfare or food benefits, even if they had completed their sentences and were re-entering society. The president's proposal would lift the felony restrictions for nutrition assistance, including the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, known as food stamps, one of the federal government's biggest anti-poverty programs. Next, demanding that Congress passes police reform. Biden called for Americans to, quote, root out systematic racism, pressuring Congress to pass police reform legislation in the name of George Floyd, whose murder by a police officer in Minneapolis last year sparked a nationwide reckoning on police brutality and racial injustice. Quote, "We have all seen the knee on injustice on the back of Black Americans. Now it's our opportunity to make some real progress," he said. Biden said he wants Congress by the next month to pass the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act, which the Democratic-led House passed earlier this year. The bill would ban police chokeholds and no-knock warrants, require data collection on police encounters, and end qualified immunity for police officers. Another point. So that was the basic synopsis there of Biden's speech on Wednesday. So now I want to piggyback that with the Congress, with a Republican rebuttal to President Biden's address to Congress.
Yeah, Tim, if you don't mind, let's go ahead and discuss that one just a little bit, and then
Sure.
we'll let you jump to that. So that paid family and medical leave, gosh, the United States can now join the rest of the civilized world.
Right. Yeah. And on one thing.
My gosh, and what just blows my mind is that do the Republicans really hate the Democrats that much that didn't deserve their applause?
Right. Well, that's
joining the rest of the civilized world. And then similarly with prescription drug prices,
Right.
did that really not deserve any Republican applause?
Brad, that dips into their pockets.
Yeah.
I mean,
How does that-
obviously, they're not going to applause when they're losing money off that. Think about how much those lobbies pay them for, pay them for, having their back on that legislation. Come on.
Yeah, there were
Yeah, but
several
what,
times.
the absolute hypocrisy of it is what just slaps you in the face. Because it's as if none of those people have mothers or dads or uncles in retirement homes, for example, or none of them have issues that require medication on a daily basis. None of them know any diabetics. I mean,
I'm convinced though that a lot of those lifetime politicians are so out of sync with like the real world. Like, I'm not sure if they do understand how much people pay for health insurance and how much people pay for medication and how it can really, and there's such a thing as bankruptcy due to health related issues, and that's just sad, to have a disease that you didn't choose, you didn't have, and then you go bankrupt, you can't buy food for your family, they make you go to the point of bankruptcy before the government will even help you. Like, sad.
Yeah, it's messed up. But so anyway, those were the two major things I wanted to discuss before we moved on, Tim. So
No, good. And extremely good points with how there were a couple other things that again, how that the Republican, the opposite side did not clap for, which the majority of their constituents would have been on board with. That's the thing. Okay, so the second article also comes from Huffington Post, written by Igor Bobik, and is titled "Senator Tim Scott urges country to reject Biden's socialist dreams in his GOP rebuttal." Quote, the actions of the president and his party are pulling us further and further and further apart, Scott, a loyal Trump ally, said after Biden's address to Congress. In the Republican rebuttal to President Joe Biden's first address to joint session of Congress on Wednesday, Senator Tim Scott, Republican, South Carolina, urged the country to reject socialist dreams following Biden's call for new programs such as free community college and childcare. Quote, "Our best future won't come from Washington schemes. It will come from you, the American people," Scott said, summing up a broad Republican Party opposition to Biden's agenda. He added, "Our nation is starving for more than empty platitudes. The actions of the president and his party are pulling us further and further and further apart. The Republicans have struggled to craft a coherent message against Biden during his first 100 days in office. They've rallied against his progressive policies and called his trillion-dollar proposals radical. And they've accused him of breaking his vow to govern in a bipartisan manner. But polls have repeatedly shown that majorities of voters, even Republican ones, like Biden's ideas and like the president personally. Scott even acknowledged that personally acknowledged the personality point by saying that Biden, quote, "seems like a good man" at the opening of his speech. Scott and stalwart Donald Trump ally, who was first elected to the Senate in 2012, was selected by his party's leadership to deliver their response earlier this week. In recent years, the rebuttal has been further given by figures who have gone on to run for president. Scott is among several Republican lawmakers mentioned as possible 2024 candidate. as a possible candidate. As the only Black Republican in the Senate, Scott has been a unique voice in his party on the issues of police reform following a number of police shooting deaths across the country. He's engaged in fresh bipartisan talks with Senator Cory Booker, a Democrat in New Jersey, and Republican Representative Karen Bass, Democrat California, but the group has struggled to reach a deal on policing overall. A key sticking point remains the issue of qualified immunity for police officers. Democrats believe officers should be held personally responsible when involved in wrongful death shootings, but the GOP is resistant to that idea. Quote, our friends across the aisle seem to want the issue more than they want the solution, but I'm still working, and I'm hoping this will be different, Scott said of bipartisan talks on police reform on Wednesday. In his speech, Scott also credited the Trump administration with the development of COVID-19 vaccines, saying Biden's quote inherited a tide that had already turned, end quote. Quote, thanks to Operation Warp Speed, the Trump administration, our country is flooded with safe and effective vaccines. Thanks to our bipartisan work last year, job openings are rebounding, Scott says. So just a real quick side note, because I've sent some letters to Deb Fisher against some of the things that she is for, I'm on her news feed or letter, I guess. I'm on her email list. So I got this from her on Friday, then obviously after the speech. And it talks about core, or here's what the letter says. Core infrastructure is an important responsibility. Oh, by the way, they misspelled responsibility of the federal government, which it is a priority for me in the Nebraska legislature. And now it's a priority for me in the Senate Commerce Committee. Americans know what infrastructure is. It's roads, bridges, ports, airports, pipelines, waterways, and broadband. And unfortunately, less than 6% of the President Biden's $2.7 trillion proposal would go to roads and bridges, barely 4% to broadband, and less than 2% to airports. Most of the money would be spent on a political wish list. For example, his proposal spends more on electric cars than it does on roads and bridges. And worst of all, the president wants to fund his initiative through higher taxes on hardworking Nebraskans. Infrastructure has always been a bipartisan issue, and it can be again. This is why the Senate Republicans have introduced real infrastructure proposal to address our nation's needs. And then one kind of side note here, of course, then she was listing all these things that she's been working on. And one of the things that kind of stuck out to me, she's involved in the importance of our modernizing our nuclear arsenal. So she said modernizing America's nuclear arsenal is a key to our nation's national defense, which is why the issue has been among my top priorities. The Senate Armed Service Committee held a meeting with Admiral Charles Richard, the commander of U.S. Strategic Air Command, to discuss the increasing threats nations like Russia and China pose. I also recently spoke to the Heritage Foundation on the future of nuclear modernization. So she's a proponent of, of our nuclear weapons yet. So anyway, yeah, that's where
What does she think we need more of, or what does she think needs to be updated? I mean,
I wish, yeah, I don't know. I need to look into it, but I was.
I believe the last estimate I saw is that we have, between the big three, Russia, China, United States, we have enough nuclear weapons to destroy the entire world 8 times over.
Yeah. So how do you? Yeah. How do you gonna make?
So I'm not sure. I'm not sure we need the 9th.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, also, like, I don't understand why they're fighting the infrastructure thing so much. for one, most of the roads that are within a state are part of the state, budget, not federal budget. So that alone doesn't make a lot of sense why they're making such a big deal about that. Also, I mean, can't we just agree that putting money into things like electric cars or trains or things like that is beneficial for infrastructure? Like, why can't you agree on that? It does benefit everyone, really, and especially if we're doing more public transportation. Not only is that benefiting the environment and infrastructure and our use of roads, but it also helps people who are truck drivers and things like that, because then they have more access and not as much wear and tear on the interstate systems. And then it also, helps people in underserved communities, which is kind of, the point is like areas where people can't afford cars. Let's give them more opportunities to have transportation from one area to another. Why is that bad?
I've heard some explanations as to why, and they're thinking that first off, they don't realize there are certain things like solar energy and wind energy and those things are part of infrastructure that they don't see it. The only thing they see is infrastructure, just like she mentioned, roads, bridges, pipelines, whatever. Just that's the only thing they see for infrastructure. They don't realize that you have to be looking in the future at those and doing things.
Exactly. It's a very, yeah. I mean, that to me, Tim's probably the key point. I mean, it's such a short-sighted approach by the Republican Party on that issue of infrastructure. We have, when you design or are trying to design a new infrastructure, you'd better at least have a time horizon of 50 years. Not a time horizon of 5 years. Because otherwise, where are you in 5 years? You're asking for another round of funding to update your infrastructure. You've got to have a far-reaching time horizon when it comes to modernizing infrastructure. I mean, the absolute minimum that should happen with pipes, shall we say, is the complete elimination of lead. There should be no lead water pipes anywhere. I mean, look at what happened to Flint, Michigan. So I mean, that is ridiculous. I mean, that's presumably part of what led to the decline of the Romans, was that they had built their aqueducts out of lead, and presumably it is slowly poisoning them, causing a mental decline at least. So anyway, that was one aspect, and then the other thing that Republicans have to try to do, I suppose, is block legislation before people find out they like it. So I mean, that in my mind was what Obamacare, all the fuss was about, because people are going to find out, hey, this is pretty good.
Yeah.
I feel slightly convinced that this is related to the lobby and people making money off of these industries, and they want to continue supporting fossil fuel companies. Sure. And kind of old school, I guess, industry. And because they're making money, those are the people that are supporting them in office, and those are the people that they're making the most money from. And so I don't think that a lot of politicians look at it as what is beneficial to all Americans. I think they look at it as, these huge companies that are giving me campaign donations, et cetera, they're not going to do that if I am against subsidizing, their industry still. So I think it's primarily money oriented.
I agree, and maybe my thinking is wrong, but I've always thought that how could things like food and they could even throw in, gas and oil, be on the commodities exchange where you can try to make money off of the stock market or off the commodities market on those essential, what you maybe call essential items. It's never made sense to me, but
Yeah. All right, Tim, I think we're going to have to leave it there. So thanks so very much for that story.
yeah.
And we will be back with our crazy story of the week.
I'm feeling so hollow. Don't you know? Don't you know? I'm living in shadow. Don't you know? Don't you know? I fell for fool's gold. I fell for fool's gold. What did I know? What did I know? I fell for fool's gold. I fell for fool's gold. What did I know? What did I know? You were fool's gold. Yes, I did.
And we're back with our crazy story of the week. So first of all, for our audience, I'll be giving the crazy story this week. Tracy is ill, so she was not able to be with us today. And I'm going to have to turn my back to the audience a little bit because I have to read the story from a different computer screen here. So don't think I'm being rude, please. We're making adjustments on the fly. Now, back in the Dark Ages, it was imagined that demons possessed a person who is performing witchcraft, and for the person to be quote unquote cured before he or she was put to death, of course, the demon had to be driven out of that person. Now, the, again, in quotes, learned men of the time knew exactly how to do this. Extreme torture. Of course, how one could be sure the demon was driven out by these methods is not clear, other than the victim telling the tormentors that she had repented. Now, the modern day end times preacher, Rick Wiles, is proposing to do the same thing. So the story I'm going to relay is entitled Rick Wiles, Dr. Fauci must be tortured until he admits he helped create COVID. The story is authored by the friendly atheist, Hemant Mehta, and it was published on April 13th of this year. Right-wing pundit and professional anti-Semite Rick Wiles, who said months ago that we should execute supposed liberal traitors, is still having Christian murder fantasies. This time, this time he wants to see Dr. Anthony Fauci tortured, wait for it, for trying to save people's lives, I guess.
Heaven forbid.
Rick Wiles, quote, "You're a liar. You know what you did, Fauci. You worked with the Chinese Communist Party for years, and you used our own taxpayer money to work on a coronavirus with bats. And you did it behind our back, deceiving the American people, and you participated in the creation of this virus. And I'll say it again, Fauci, You should be taken to Guantanamo Bay and waterboarded until you cough up the truth, including the names of the other traitors who have helped China damage the United States of America with this virus.
I mean, Donald Trump.
Yeah, he must have screwed up when he was working on it and he caught it himself.
Yeah.
Now, this goes back to the friendly atheist comments. He must be in a competition with other right-wing nut jobs over who can squeeze the most lies in the shortest soundbite. Given that he needs to be graded on a curve, maybe Wiles deserves some credit for finally acknowledging the virus exists. By the way, he's made the same threat before against liberals, saying they should be, quote, transported to Guantanamo and waterboarded to confess who's funding the left-wing organizations. Update, he's still at it today. And you can view a video of his latest rants concerning this topic also on the Friendly Atheist website. So unfortunately, this guy has a listening audience of several 100,000 people who actually believe that this is what should be done.
I think he's the one that's been working with the bats because he's off a little batty himself.
Yep. Well, I mean, what are you going to say to that? You just have to laugh. I mean, what can you say to that?
It's just like our conversation earlier. You just like, there is no argument against things like that because they're just so absurd. And so, there's no evidence. Like, how do you come back, because they're obviously not willing to listen to reason or evidence-based information. And so like, there's no argument.
Yeah. I mean, it's like the old saying, I can't argue with that because you're not even wrong.
Oh, yeah.
So anyway, I think that definitely qualified for our crazy story of the week.
No.
So that will wrap us up for this week. If you have enjoyed our program, please pass the word to your friends and associates, believers and non-believers alike. Again, just a reminder that you are welcome to post questions and comments on our Facebook page. Remember, there is an enormous difference between having good reasons for what one accepts to be true and having bad ones. Incidentally, this is the only distinction one needs to become a strict atheist. This has been Dr. Brad for Abby and Tim saying so long.
Yeah.